Again, I'm Steve Hanson. I'm the Director of User Education here. And I'm going to really touch on a sort of a mosaic of different features. We're calling them power user features. These are all features that, maybe are a little bit maybe neglected. People don't really know about them, but they'll really help out to really squeeze the most out of Sample Manager that you can. I really want to hit on 4 areas if hopefully I have time. First, let's take a look at field validation. These are all features around controlling data input and getting cleaner data that'll really help your analysis later on. Second, I want to look at reporting in Sample Manager. Normally, don't really think about reporting as part of Sample Manager, but we're increasing those capabilities. And especially, I want to look at some of the pre-built reports that are there already. Third, I want to take a look at the ability to partition data within Sample Manager. This is something that's, people who are coming from the LabKey server side are pretty familiar with, but this is a really powerful security feature in LabKey, in Sample Manager that you should definitely take a look at. And fourth, let's take a look at using workflow to help import your assay data. So first, let's take a look at field validation. Again, these are all features around controlling the quality of data as it's coming into the system. And I've done a couple of things. I've done a little bit of modification of Hannah's setup that she did during her talk. I've taken that DNA table and I've sort of massaged it a little bit. I made it, I've really done 3 things to it that I wanted to point out. First of all, I made one of these fields required. By default, when you create a new field in a sample table, it's just optional. You don't necessarily need to provide a value, but you can make any field that you create required, and you really should take advantage of this because, or you should take advantage of this when you really need the data to interpret the sample. And I'm thinking of, some key pieces of data might be the date collected or the organism the sample came from. If you don't have either of those pieces of data, you've really hobbled yourself in sort of understanding what this sample means. Like, where did it come from? When did it come from? When was it created? So those are classic fields to make required, and that's what I've done right here. This field, date collected, this is now a required field. You can't, basically means you can't import data without providing this date. Doesn't look like much until we actually go and look at importing data, so let's try it out. I'm going to go import a new DNA sample, and I'm just going to fill out some of this here. I'm going to say this is available. I'm going to say, its tube type was a blue top. Notice this date collected field. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little asterisk right there. That means it's required. Well, I'm going to just see what happens if I try to import without adding that field. Oh my gosh, I got a red error message, and it says date collected is missing from your first row. Well, that just means I have to provide something. So let's say I collected this today. So this is now when I import, I get a clean import. Second, another thing I've done to this table is I've added, you saw some of those drop downs that I'd added that were present during the import process, I actually created those dropdowns, and they're created by a field type called a text choice field type. So let's go back to edit this sample I just imported, DNA 216. And let's just edit it and take a look at some of these things. Note this dropdown here, this tube type dropdown. I actually decided to include these values in this dropdown. So the idea behind this style of data entry is it constrains the kinds of data that you can enter here. You can't just enter free form text. The user really has to choose between these items. And you can see that in the design of the DNA table right here. If I go to our designer, this tube type field, it's a text choice field, and these are the values I've added to it. I can add other ones if I want, like, some call it other tube, and now that other tube option will be added to the dropdown center. A cool little pro tip for people out there. Let me save this. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. Let's go back and say I wanted to add another field to my table here. Let's add something like a DNA preservative field. I've got 5 different DNA preservatives I might want to add here. What I can do is just list those out. I just copied those onto my clipboard. And now I'm going to go add this new field to my DNA table. Select text choice. And now I just need to specify the values in that dropdown. I'm going to just paste those DNA preservatives in there. And great, I've got myself a brand new text choice field for constrained entry, right there. Now, you can also make a text choice field out of existing data. Like, look at this field right here, collection data, collection method. This is just right now just a free form text field, but you can actually convert it to a text choice field. This is a really cool feature Hannah just showed me last week. I didn't even know it was there. All you got to do is take your text field and turn it into a text choice field. And look, LabKey will detect how many unique values you already have present, in this case, biopsy and blood derivative. I can add more if I want later on, but now I've just converted my freeform field into a text choice field. Finally, let's take a look at range validation. This is the ability to fix numerical ranges for certain fields. And I've added a range validated to this field here, the A260-280 field. It doesn't make sense to have negative values in that field. So I said, well, let's just make sure that the value has to be, above 0. And so you can see this enforcement here. If I try to edit this field and try to put something nonsensical there, if I try to put -1 there, LabKey is going to complain and say, hey, value -1 for this field is invalid. Enter a decimal number greater than 0. So, okay, I'll obey the rules and I'll put, 1.8 there. So again, these are all just ways to help control your data entry and get yourself clean data into the system. Let me keep moving here. Second, let's take a look at reporting in the system. These are really ways to give you a more condensed view of the data and to help signal sort of maybe key parts of the data, highlight key parts of the data. I'm thinking about, there's lots of different places to do this, lots of different ways to do this in LabKey, in Sample Manager. But one of the key ones is your ability to create custom versions of your tables or your grids. Notice this DNA table. Mostly you're just sort of, maybe you think you have a fixed view of this table. You don't have much control over it, but you actually have lots of control over this grid. And I've actually created different versions of this grid by adding and removing columns, by adding filters to the two columns, and by sorting certain columns. And you can use all those mechanisms to sort of build a grid that you want, that's relevant to you. And then you can actually save it and find it again later. Those saved views are available here off this views menu. And I've made two such views. One of them is called high purity DNA samples. Let's take a look at that view. This view, it's basically specified a filter on my A260, A280 field. And it said, show me values between that are greater than 1.7 and less than 1.9. That's considered pure for a DNA sample. Well, now I know there's 4 such pure DNA samples. I also created another view called mouse information. And this is a version of the grid where I pulled in some information about my mice sources. And I've added these 2 columns here to this version of the grid. By the way, these were created using the ancestor field, which Hannah just briefly pointed out as she was building out the system. I was able to build this grid by going to this customize grid view menu. This will give you a pop-up dialog where you have 2 panes. On the left are all of the available fields that you can show in your grid. And then on the right, these are all of the panes that are actually in the grid right now. And what I've done in this case to get that mouse information into the grid is I opened up this ancestors node. The ancestors node gives you the ability to pull in data from other tables. So you can pull in, say, data from other samples you might have. And in this case, I pulled in my source data from my mice. And I actually added 2 fields from the mouse table. I added the mouse name itself, but I also added the strain information. And if I want to, I could also add the sex information and the date of birth information. So just to get you a sense of that, it's kind of nice to, first of all, select over on the right sort of roughly where you want the field to go. So if I wanted to add a sex column and the date of birth column, we'll see when I update the grid, I just added these 2 columns to it. Now I could save this, like LabKey knows I've modified this grid. I can save it. And now I even have a richer mouse information view of the data. By the way, you can see that you're looking at a particular grid view up here. This little mouse information is signaling that. But let's suppose I want to go back to my default view. That's available as well. Now I'm back to sort of my vanilla view of the DNA. Some other features that I think are really key in Sample Manager right now are features behind this button. Notice this blue button, go to Sample Finder. I think this is a bit neglected. I think people should really use this feature a bit more. The Sample Finder is an area where you can create really multifaceted queries on your samples. We already did a little bit of that in the grid, right? We're able to filter the grid. We're able to sort the grid, add and remove columns to the grid, and then save those reports for ourselves. But here, you can really use all of the data in the system to create a query. You can ask it like, show me all of the samples with such and such properties, with such and such parent properties, with such and such assay properties, etc., and build a whole query and save it for yourself. And those saved searches will end up here behind this dropdown. We provide you a number of pre-built reports here. For example, there's this one here, samples expiring in the next 7 days. If we take a look at that, we can see that I have 2 such samples. One's going to expire tomorrow, and then one's going to expire today. And this search was built, it's a dynamic search. It's going to change, like I'm going to get different results tomorrow. I'm going to have just one sample that's going to expire in 7 days. This is also a modifiable search. If 7 days isn't the window you're interested in, you could say, well, I actually want to see a 14-day window. So you could modify the search and say, I want to see up ahead 14 days from now. And sure enough, I get a slightly different result. I get 3 such samples are going to expire. I could save this, but I won't. I'll stick with my 7 days usual. Another thing you can do is you can save your own searches. And I created another search for samples that have already expired. And there are 2 such samples that come back from this search. One expired back on the 7th and another one today. So just wanted to show you some of the possible reports that you can find in Sample Manager. Let's take a look at our third item, which is partitioning data. Now, by partitioning data, I mean the Sample Manager allows you to create different data portals for different teams inside the system. This is really about supporting different teams and their private samples and their security needs around those samples. And a lot of the various compliance standards that are out there require these kinds of features. In fact, I've created 4 different partitions of the data in this instance of Sample Manager. And in fact, I've been operating inside one of these partitions the whole time. The hint is right here. Do you see this little project alpha right here? That's one of the partitions I created. And there's actually, if I sort of broaden my view of this system, I'll see that there's 4 partitions here. There's Project Beta, Project Gamma, and then something called the Home Project. Well, each one of these projects, they're called, or data partitions, has its own data. Let's go over to, well, let's go over to Project Beta and see what's in there. Let's go to its DNA samples. Well, there's 5 DNA samples in here, and they have names like DNA-B5, DNA-B4. These are totally different samples from the Alpha project. And the intent here is this is some other team's data. It's data that they want to secure independently. They don't want other people to see it. And so this is sort of their own portal to interact with. Let's take a look at Project Gamma. This is still an empty, relatively empty, or it's got 100 samples in it. Take a look at the Home project. Now the Home project is a little bit different. It's actually a place where you can see roll-up views of the data. And there are 111 rows of data, rows of DNA inside of the Home project. And notice this is a multi-project view of the data. I can see data here from Project Alpha and Project Beta and Project Gamma and this Home project where I'm currently residing. So there may by the way, there may also even be projects or partitions here that I can't see. I mean, there aren't. I'm the admin. I can see everything. But if I were just a lower level user, like an editor or a reader, there might be projects I'd never get to see. You know, Project Delta, Project Epsilon, that I just wasn't granted permission to. And I would never see that data. Another aspect of partitioning data in LabKey is it is also many of the resources are shared across projects. They're common or global to the projects. And in particular, its table definitions are common to all of the projects. Tables are defined once in one place, and then they sort of cascade into or shine into all of the different data partitions. And so I'm thinking of the DNA table itself, the columns that it has, the data types that it has, those are all shared in common. And the idea here is that it gives all of those teams a way to standardize around one data shape or one data schema. That's going to help for analysis. It's going to help for data consistency. What's not shared is the data itself. So, but just to give you a sense of it, if I go and modify my DNA table, like I'm going to go into the designer and just add, you know, call it some new field. This field is going to be available in all of the projects now. And so even if I go into Project Alpha, that field is now going to be available to use if I want it. I don't necessarily need to, but here it is, some new field if I wanted to add it. It's now part of my grid, and if Project Beta wanted to add that field, it could as well. Another thing I think that's important to keep in mind in this realm is that different users and different teams can be given different roles in these different projects. And we can see that from the permissions area. So right now, inside of Project Alpha, I'm right, again, the hint, where are you at any given time? The hint is up here off of the main menu. Project Alpha will give you a hint of what project you're currently looking in. Notice I've given Researcher 1 the reader role inside of Project Alpha. And I've given myself storage editor in Project Alpha. Now, suppose I wanted to sort of elevate some people and their permissions in this project. All I would do is just add a new role to their repertoire. So if I wanted to make Researcher 1 not just a mere reader, but elevate him to an editor, I would just give him editor. And now that researcher has the ability to both see the data in Project Alpha and change it. But that didn't mean anything for that user's experience or access to Project Beta. If I go over to Project Beta, and let's look at the permission profile over there. Well, Researcher 2 is a reader in Project Beta. Researcher 1 doesn't even know about this project and wouldn't even see the links to it or be able to access it. Quickly, I'm going to do one thing more here. and that's take a look at workflow and assays. I'm going to do this so quickly, it's not even going to be worthy of the feature, but I want to leave time for some questions and answers here. I've developed a number of workflow templates to wrap around samples. In particular, what I want to do is I want to run this PCR job. I'm going to take some samples, I'm going to wrap it in this job. And as I go through the steps of the job and complete it, one of those steps is going to be to actually import the assay data. And I just want to show how easily you can pass through all these complicated structures in LabKey when you know how to use the workflow. So let's suppose I wanted to run a PCR assay on these two samples. First, I'm going to select them and wrap them in a new job, wrap them in that job I created. So I'm going to say start a new job. I'm going to choose that template, run the PCR assay. I'm going to give it a name, PCR for the demo. I'm going to assign it to me. I'm going to notify researcher 1. Notice I don't see researcher 2 or 3 in this list. That's because they don't know about this project. They're not part of this gang. I'm going to put some due dates on this, and then finally give it a priority. It's pretty high priority. Now the job is active. I can start clicking through it. Let's suppose first check out and prep the samples. Done. Next, run the PCR protocol. Done. Third, let's import the data to the PCR assay. Now, if I click into this job, notice I get this link right here, import run. That's going to take me right over to the assay import area. LabKey's already queued up those 2 samples I already had there. I'm ready to fill out my experiment. Boom. I just so quickly created a new trackable job for this and imported the assays. So easy. Anyways, I'll stop there. I'm already pushing my time. Questions or anything, Hannah, that are out there?
Yes. Is storage shared across projects?
It is. It has much the same behavior as tables. The actual shape of the freezers is shared, but that doesn't mean that you can just see all the data or all of the vials that are in the freezer. What you'll see is, suppose you're looking at a box, and some of the vials are for some project and some of the vials are for another project that you don't have access to. You'll only be giving data about those vials that you have access to. Any of those other vials that you don't have access to, they'll be shown as just like a little gray X. You'll physically know something's there, but that's all you'll know.
And maybe as other folks are working to ask questions in the Q&A, another question that I have, or that we commonly get, is using workflows, and why do people use workflow jobs? I think the most common cases are really around sort of the capturing work that needs to be done on samples. So as Steve kind of had his workflow set up for that, we also have people using workflow jobs for sample requests. I know that Tristan kind of mentioned that they were using pick lists for that, but workflows really gives you sort of that notification component if that's desired as well. Steve, I'm not sure if there's other scenarios there that you wanted to touch on.
Really, they give you a way to do anything from a really formal protocol or SOP. They give you a way to track that, or they give you a way to track things that are really more quotidian or just daily, like, ship these samples or put stickers on these samples, that kind of thing.
Okay, and one last question here. Where is the data securely stored? If it's stored in the cloud, is there any rules around that? So I can help answer that. Yes, the data is stored on the cloud, and we use Amazon Web Services as our hosting provider. We do all of the management and security around this as well. So we have a very knowledgeable team that has compliance backgrounds in terms of being able to manage this data. We also have additional security when PHI comes into play, or when there are additional requirements around trying to meet HIPAA. And so if that is something that's needed, we're certainly capable of doing that, and can offer that to our clients as well.